We go forever and ever, yeah. You know that I'm much upset, yeah. You wish that you can do better, no, no, won't let her, We go forever and ever, yeah. I go and create the pressure, yeah. You wish that you can do better, You wish that you can do better, yeah, yeah. Ooh, we go forever and ever. We go forever and ever.
Welcome everyone to Coaching in Session. My name is Michael Rearden, and I'll be your mindset coach today. And today we're going to be talking about communication. And today I'm going to be bringing on a communication coach who's going to be helping us understand the ideas of communication. When I have a communications coach on, it's always an interesting conversation because number one, they're always great communicators. So they're able to really answer the questions in a unique and different manner. If you look at any of the past podcasts, I think I had maybe 3 or 4 different communication coaches on already so far, where what I'm looking for from them is to get an understanding of how people are thinking, their mindsets when it comes to communication, and then looking at how we can make it better. Because in our society, we have lost the ability to be effective communicators, whether we believe so or not. You know, just recently, I guess maybe a couple months ago now, Kamala Harris, she just hired her 3rd speechwriter. Communication, right? Because the way she's communicating is not grabbing the hearts of the United States people. A lot of people are seeing her words as insignificant, but words have the ability to be powerful. And we have the ability to create powerful relationships and to create powerful mindsets. So when we're looking at communication and the possibilities that can come from it, we do have to grab a good understanding of what communication is and then go from there. So I'm going to be happy to talk to my guest, Giovanna Elias, who's going to be helping us understand the concepts of communication, diving into her 9-key system, or at least part of it today, and then going from there. So here's the interview with Giovanna and myself.
Don't wanna take it slow. Just wanna let you know. Ready to spend
Welcome,
some
Giovanna
time.
Elias, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So today I have you on as a human connection and communications coach. And that is a mouthful. I wanted to call you all these other things. You do some amazing work. And the conversations that you and I had already off air have been amazing. So I'm excited for what we're going to be talking about today. But in your own words, can you explain what you do and how you help people?
Yeah, for sure. So at the basis of my work, and I'll start by a quote that I always go by. I always believe that the quality of our lives is based upon the quality of our relationships. So really, in essence, human connection comes down to building healthy relationships. And that shows up at work, that shows up with our clients and our colleagues, our bosses, our managers, shows up with our family, with our kids, our parents, our siblings, shows up in our romantic relationships, be it with boyfriends, girlfriends, husband, wife, that shows up with complete strangers. So I think everything in life is a relationship. And when we do have these quality relationships and when we know how to talk to people, we really can build quality lives. On the flip side of that, I always say that every problem is a people problem. So if you really stop and take a moment just to think about all the issues, all the struggles that you've ever gone through in your life, it really does come down to, one, the people problems, the relationships you've had with other people, or at its core, the relationship that you have with yourself. So in a nutshell, I've built out what I call the connection code. It's my 9-key system, and it really helps people dive deeply into how to build these healthy, connected relationships, first and foremost with themselves, but then as a, butterfly effect of doing the work on ourselves, that shows up in our family life, in our friendships, in our romantic relationships, in our businesses, in every area of life, all the way down to the coffee shop when you're making friends with somebody in the line.
I think it's going to be important for the audience to understand the difference between what is a healthy relationship and what is a toxic type of relationship. Because even in my life, I see many friends and family members who hold on to toxic relationships, but they think it's healthy. So they have that mindset of, well, it's family, so it must be considered healthy because they're supposed to love me. They're supposed to have their best intentions for me. But sometimes their behaviors and their actions are not congruent to being a healthy type of relationship. Can I have some of your expert advice on the difference between a healthy versus a toxic relationship?
For sure. The first 2 things that come up for me, the first 2 words when we talk about this is 1, values, and 2, boundaries. I always go back to some of the great doctors that do this excellent work, one being Dr. Brené Brown. She always talks about compassion. And she says compassion can't exist, empathy can't exist without boundaries. And so I think boundaries really is about getting clear first and foremost, and this goes back to values, on what we value, on what's important for us, on what's meaningful for us, what is comfortable versus what's going beyond the limits of what we're comfortable with. And I think that's the important piece of first connecting with ourselves, first getting clear with ourselves on what our values are, on what is important for us, and where our limit is in terms of what's uncomfortable. And that's where our boundaries are. And so when we finally become aware of what our values are and our boundaries, we now know how to communicate those. And I think that's where a healthy relationship shows up. Where toxic relationships come into play is when we don't communicate our boundaries, and even worse, when we're not even clear of what they are. And so this is often when you'll see in different types of relationships, we can use a romantic one, for example, that will often let one partner perhaps take advantage of us or do something continuously that's always uncomfortable for us, and we let it go and we let it go and we let it go until we either fight back, attack, or we fully go into avoidance mode, and that creates further disconnection. So at the end of the day, we want to first get in touch with ourselves and say, okay, what do I value? What's meaningful for me? What's important? Then where are my boundaries at? And then how do I communicate that in such a way that's clear for the person to understand and said with the most compassion? That way we can actually have this connection and we can have a healthy relationship. Where boundaries don't live is often where toxic relationships do live.
When we start to look at the idea of values and expectations, especially in our current society, it's very easy for someone to say, I want this type of partner. For men, they might want a woman who's fit, feminine, and friendly. And for a woman, she might want a successful, manly man who makes six figures, is over 6 feet tall, maybe in shape, right? It's a bonus. So there's these expectations, but sometimes we get to a point in our life, it's like maybe like in our late 30s, especially if we're not married, the clock is ticking, especially for women. For men, we have the abundance of time where we can continue to grow and make ourselves, I guess, the best candidate for any type of woman. For women, typically, by age 30, 90% of her eggs are already gone. So her clock is ticking. If she wants kids, she's going to have to act quicker. So she might not have time to look for those expectations anymore, looking for that manly man or that guy who's making over six figures. So in a sense, she's going to start to maybe look at, is he going to take care of me? Is he going to love me? Is he going to respect me? The value system, right? So when we start to look at expectations versus values, what would you say is the difference between men and women?
Oh, okay. Let me go backwards on this for a second before we dive even into that. I really like the examples you brought up because I think there's a very big difference between just saying, oh, I want a tall, dark, rich, and handsome man versus I want a man who is driven, who is goal oriented, who is working hard towards things in his life. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to be making six figures, but it's really the qualities, the characteristics of that person that you're looking for underneath all of that. So, first and foremost, I would say when people start unraveling their values and what's important for them, they should actually be looking at what's underneath the surface of what they think they want. What are the true qualities behind someone that's fit? I would say most certainly having a fit man is obviously very attractive and appealing. But for me, more than anything, I would say fitness is attractive because it often shows discipline. It shows consistency. It shows someone showing up and being dedicated to an end goal. And that is what is attractive. So for these women that are hitting, their later 30s, I would say I wouldn't necessarily minimize your values. I would just get really clear on what that is. Is it really six figures and a fit body? Or is it more of a man that's dedicated, that's driven, that's goal oriented, that actually takes steps to execute the things that he wants to reach in his life? In which case, then I would say you got a winner on your hands. Please repeat for me. You mentioned the difference between men and women.
So looking at the expectations between men and women, like what a male might want and what a woman might want in a situation, and then looking at the expectations and looking at the value system, and then looking at it in the sense of, is it appropriate to think of it that way?
Well, often, if I'm answering your question correctly, often I see men totally generalizing here. I often see that they want a younger woman, they want a fit woman, someone that's very well put together, attractive. And if we're really feeding into traditional gender roles, then they want a woman that can care for them, nurture, perhaps take care of the family, cook, take care of the kids, all that good stuff. For a woman, I think generally speaking, we want more of that type of leadership role, that more of the masculine, even more of the traditional masculine, in the sense of like a man who takes care of the bills and a man who can work and a man who's focused and, like I said, driven. And we could throw fitness into that. But I think far more often for women, it's more about status and finances. And for men, we're often looking more at the beauty side of things. I would still argue for people to unpack that and unravel what is really underneath that you want and how much of that is socialization. So does a man want a healthy, beautiful looking woman because that breeds good babies and good children? Or does a man want that because maybe he's superficial and that's something he should be addressing inside of himself?
And the reason why I'm harping on relationships, because when you get into a relationship, then the communication has to begin. Because sometimes if you don't have a strong understanding of what is a relationship, it's a lot of communication. And the reason why the majority of relationships and marriages fail is because of lack of communication. We need at least 90 minutes of meaningful communication every single week with our partner. If we don't have that, the relationship is going to start to have some difficulties. It's not hard to create 90 minutes. You can do that in the car if you're driving. You can do that on a date night every week. If you don't want to do it every week, every 2 weeks, if you want to do it every 2 weeks, once a month at least, then you can supplement that maybe at the dinner table, no phones, just having conversation, meaningful conversations. And I want to kind of get into your communication code, your 9 key system, so we can start to unpack the ideas of communication and how people can become better communicators.
For sure. So I'll start sharing and unpacking the first three, because if we did all 9, we'd be here all day, which I'm sure you and I'd be entertained with. To first start, before saying any of these keys that I'll address, I think communication is something intentional. We have to be intentional about it and we have to be consistent with it. And so if we are going back to the relationship piece, we're talking about, intimate relationships, even in an office setting, even between your team and managers, we want to be really intentional about how often are we communicating? Are we taking time aside every week, let's say, to have group meetings or to have that one-on-one time with our partner, to have date nights? Are we choosing the same day once a month or once every 2 weeks or once every week to do it? That way, it's actually easier to execute these things. So I think it's really important for us before anything is to be intentional about our communication, and more than anything, to be consistent, because those things make a huge difference. So getting into the 9 keys. The first of the 9 keys is what I say is curiosity. And so curiosity is huge, and curiosity starts with ourselves. And this goes even back to what we were saying about knowing our values and our boundaries. We want to get curious about who we are, about what's important for us, about what our needs are, what our values are, our boundaries are. So if we actually were to take time to reflect within ourselves and say, what's important for me in this relationship? What's important for me with my team? What's important for me in the relationship I have with my kids? And how do I want that to show up? That's us starting to get curious and asking ourselves. That way we can then execute that in the communication we have with others. But the second piece, or the flip side to this, is getting curious about other people. And so I often find, Mike, that a breakdown in communication and a breakdown in connection can happen when we're not curious about other people, when we're not asking not only questions, but what I like to call quality questions. And this is really unpacking the onion. And this is really going layers deeper into someone, into their spirit, into their essence, what's really in their heart, and understanding at a core who is someone and what is really important for them. And I find when we do get curious about people, for one, people just light up because they're like, wow, somebody actually cares enough to ask me, which is huge. And already it's like natural brownie points. But the second piece to that is, I think the more we get curious about a person, the more we know how to talk to them, the more we know how to address their emotional needs, the more we know how to bond on a level where they feel seen and heard and acknowledged. And that can change the whole game in any kind of a relationship. I'm thinking, I'm kind of laughing out loud because The research I've done on curiosity is really fascinating. There is a professor by the name of Dr. Todd Kashdan, and he shows curiosity on a graph. So he shows like little kids, babies, like right up here, top notch, super curious, don't know anything about the world, touching everything, putting everything in their mouth. I'm sure you know this. You've got little kids yourself. So they're curious. They want to know about everything going on, and they will use all of their senses to engage with something new for them. They're right up here. And for those of you that are listening in, I'm at the peak. We're talking right at the peak. As kids become adolescents, that peak starts to dip. And so imagine it's sort of like a graph. They're dipping down and they're becoming less curious. Now, this doesn't mean that teenagers are less curious by nature. It just means often they're too afraid to ask. So imagine you're in a classroom, you're with a bunch of students. You know how this is. You're a teacher. You've got a bunch of kids that are there and all their peers are watching them. And every student, I shouldn't say every student, many students are often afraid that they're going to look foolish. Are they the only one that has this question? And so they often won't ask. But the funny thing is that usually when that one student does ask, everybody else is like, oh, thank God somebody asked the question. That sigh of relief, like, okay, so I'm not the only one that was thinking this. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not that teens don't want to know, it's that we're afraid to often ask. The funny thing, though, that showed up in the research is that as adults, not only does it dip even deeper down the graph, it concaves. And so adults are paralyzed to ask oftentimes. We're afraid to ask. We also assume that we should pretty much know everything at this point in time. And so we won't ask questions because we think, okay, maybe I should have already learned this. Or we're trained to believe that it's too intrusive. And so if we ask these uncomfortable questions, what do we always say in our society? Don't talk religion, don't talk politics, don't talk sex. I'm like, these are good conversations. Why can't we talk about them? And so I think automatically this kills curiosity and it creates a fear to go there because it might be too uncomfortable. And so I think if we were to actually give ourselves graces and allow ourselves to really just dig into that inner child curiosity again, we would have really fascinating conversations to begin with. Definitely a broader understanding of humanity as a whole and just different perspectives that we are often in our own bubble, in our own worlds, living in our own perspectives about until we start to have these different types of dialogues. But more than anything, I think we're able to connect deeper with people because we truly then start to understand what's going on in here and in here, mind and heart inside of someone. And I think that's really that's like the juice of connection. That's like the juice of understanding a human being.
Let's break down curiosity before we kind of go on with the connection code. Curiosity is one of those things that people love talking about themselves, and it's important for guys, especially on the first date, to ask questions, to be curious about their date, and to have the woman talk about who she is, what she does, et cetera, because again, people love talking about themselves. So some of the work I do is I help men who are looking for relationships, and we look at the mindset of the opposite sex and also the mindset of them. Are you confident, right? We work on that. Most of the times it's a confidence issue where they might see a beautiful girl at the bar or something. They don't want to go up to her. Why, right? So we start to look at that, right? And then we implement systems and basically, I guess, routines that they can create to create the habit of, I can go talk to anyone and be perfectly fine. Because I think we give ourselves that fear. But going back to that curiosity aspect, when you're curious about what someone does, whether you're interested or not interested, it's going to still invoke that same feeling of, wow, this person is asking me questions. They're being inquisitive. And I always tell guys, there's a certain set of questions I typically tell them to ask. And some of those questions are red flag questions too, because you can get a good understanding of mindset just from the first 3 dates with someone. Typically, we can already show if a girl is going to be a good candidate for that type of individual.
Can I ask what these questions are?
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there.
I'm like, give me the juice, Mike.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. We have to validate what this person wants, because sometimes they might want just a relationship for a month or a week or something, or they might want a free dinner. So we do have to understand that, especially because I also say that men have to be traditional on the first date, because I tell women that if a man doesn't pay in the first date, then he's, no good, right?
Amen. Amen.
Now, this is going to cause hoopla, but this is to only be if you're looking for a long-term relationship. If you're looking for a fling, you guys can go out and get drinks, and that's perfectly fine. But if you're going to go out and try to find a relationship, it's a different type of situation. So I'm only looking at the aspect of we are trying to be in a relationship, not looking to hook up. So I already talked to the guy about this or talked to the woman about this. This is the situation we're looking at. We're not looking about hooking up. That's easy. So relationship. So when you're on that date, you're asking about their work, things like that. And the first thing you're going to figure out if they're traditional or if they're modern, right? So you ask about their parents. Are your parents still married? Oh, okay. How many siblings do you have? What order are you in that mix? Are you the youngest? Are you the oldest? Typically, you're the oldest. You're going to have a little bit more responsibilities, right? So that means you're over here taking care of your younger siblings. You're more responsible, right? So in a relationship, you're actually going to be more responsible. So you could be more attentive too. Okay, that's a good thing. If you're the youngest, you might be babied, right? So you might be daddy's girl or mommy's girl or whatever it is. So you have to understand that. And then you have to ask a few more questions. Okay, did you go to college? Yes, I'm going to college, blah, blah, blah. I went to school for this. Okay, why did you choose this major? Asking about that. They might say something, oh, the reason why I'm doing this is because it's making a lot of money. Or maybe the reason why I'm doing this is because my mom's a nurse. So you start to figure out why they did something. So if it's for superficial reasons like money, red flag. And it's so bad. It sounds so bad. It sounds so bad, but I have to tell men this because marriage is a bad deal for men. It's a terrible deal.
That's interesting.
It is a terrible deal. And we can even talk about that. Terrible deal for men. So I make sure that men understand that they're getting the best candidate for that wife role. Because if they get a bad candidate, they're going to lose half their stuff. They're going to lose the kids. They're going to lose their house. And the court systems, especially here in America, they favor the woman. So even if the woman is mentally unstable, she is going to be seen as the go-to person in front of a jury. The jury is going to say, oh, the mom's here. The mom wants the kids. The moms want the house. The mom wants this. Yeah. But guess what? She might not be a viable candidate. Well, we could talk a little bit more about that. And then the third question is just understanding, can they be respectful? Do they ask questions to you? Are they attentive? Right? What did they order? Because if they're ordering a lobster for $250, are they being respectful? First date. I'm not saying get a salad, ladies. I'm saying understand what you order. There are going to be people, and there are videos out there of a woman who go up, get a $200, $300 plate. And then the guy's like, I'm not paying for this. And the girl's like, I can't believe you're not paying this, blah, 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 blah. Well, the reason why is because he understood the third red flag right there. That third question is you're not being respectful of me. Because if you can't even respect my wallet, how can you respect me as a person? So in the beginning, it's a lot of little things that add up to the bigger picture. The same thing with women. The women have to ask the right questions. There's a lot of red flags for men also that they have to validate before that. But, if you want to go into your maybe questions or your dating questions that you ask men, that's perfectly fine too. But for me, it's understanding is he going to pay the bill, right? This is a simple one, right? Is he asking you questions? Number two, does he remember little things? Your favorite color, if you have a dog, the name of the dog or a cat. The little things matter because they add up to the big things later.
They definitely do. There's so much you said that I want to unpack. And I'm like, where do I even start?
Communication is a lot to unpack. And then especially in the relationship aspect.
For sure. Huge. So just as a little playful side note, to avoid any conflicts about dinner in general, and maybe this is just how I operate from having traveled the world, most cultures don't have separate plates. They actually share food. So I actually think there's something really beautiful to be said about sitting together at the table and opening up the menu together and reading it together. And I'll always ask the man, what's calling your attention? Do we want to share a couple plates? Which ones do you like? These are the ones I liked. What do you think? And then it's kind of like a collaborative team effort to pick your favorite foods. And then we've got a nice little array of things at the table that we're also eating together and sharing. So I think that just makes the whole experience that much more fruitful in general. So I do think this helps. I will say that men could afford to take the lead a little bit more oftentimes in restaurant situations because it can be a bit awkward as a woman. Okay, he didn't open the menu. Are we going to eat? Are we just doing drinks? What does he eat? It's kind of nice if the man just says, oh, I've noticed a few of these things. I really like these. Do you want to share them? Just communicating over the food really just helps. Going back to the communication piece. I think questions in general, and we're speaking to being on a date, I think once again, this goes back to we're going full circle here on the curiosity piece towards self. When you take time to actually recognize what is important and valuable for you, then you're going to ask questions around those values. So, for example, for me, I think it's very important if we're talking physical values. I think it's very important that a man takes care of himself. He eats well, he eats clean, he's active. And this is not just about like, oh, do you have a beautiful body? But it is about more of the discipline piece. Like, are you actually taking measures daily to take care of your overall health? Health is a very top value for me. So, questions, I may not have specific questions, but they're going to revolve around health. And it may be asking like, are you a part of teams, or do you like sports? Do you like to work out? Whatever it may be in that realm, or, what are your favorite foods, your favorite dishes? Even something as simple as like culture, like understanding their cultural background will already tell you a lot about their upbringing, what they eat, what they enjoy, whether they value things like fitness, depending where they grew up, all of these different things as well. So I think it's really simple to ask questions when you're already clear on what your values are, because when you know that, okay, this is something that's important for me. I know, for example, that, I'm very driven in my own business. I love the work I do. I would want someone that actually wakes up in the morning and cares about what they're doing. Because to just see them do a 9 to 5 and feel drained at the end of the day is so out of alignment with the life I'm living. And I wouldn't want to see that in my partner either. So we'd also have conversations around that. It wouldn't look so much of like, hey, babe, how much money are you making? It's more like, do you love what you do? What made you decide to get into that? What led you to that? Do you find it exciting and fulfilling and fruitful? And is it worth it for you? And, how far along are you in that? That already gives you an idea of where someone might be at. And sometimes there are awkward questions for the gentlemen out there that are listening. Sometimes there are awkward questions, and you can just say a disclaimer. Also for the women, just disclaim what you want to say, and say, this might be uncomfortable, or this might be awkward, or it might be intruding, but I would love to know this. And that way they know, like, you're aware that it might be awkward or, intrusive, and you really want to know about them. And that's it. So I almost think we need to be unapologetically curious.
And then, like, looking at the connection code after curiosity, what's going to be the third? Because I know we talked about the first two. It's going to be dealing about curiosity in self and then curiosity in others.
So that's
what about
the
third one?
first.
Oh, that's both the first.
Yeah. So every key is what I call them. Every key first addresses self, and then it addresses how that shows up in our relationships. Yeah.
Okay. So we're on the second one.
We're on the second one, baby.
All right. So here we go. Number two.
So number two is what I call consciousness. And consciousness in a nutshell is chalked down to awareness. And awareness can be broken off into a few different pieces. Awareness first shows up as presence. So how present are you with the person? How mindful are you? And this goes back to what you were saying earlier, Mike, about the small details make a big difference, or remembering those small little things they shared with you. That goes a long way. That shows me that you are present. It shows me that you are actively listening. It shows me that you're actually taking notes, whether you're showing me or not, because you're coming full circle and bringing it back into the conversation again. So that presence already tells me, okay, he's here with me. He cares. He's mindful. He's listening. These are beautiful components of what make an excellent flow-like conversation. So that's one piece of awareness. The other piece of awareness is being aware of the mental, emotional, physical, and energetic. And we can unpack all of those. And that's a much bigger beast that I do go into in my program. But in a nutshell, I always say you want to be really mindful of whether you're feeling energetically drained or invigorated after any sort of interaction with a person. So this is very simply what I chalked down to before, during, and after. So how is your energy before you even go into an interaction? Because if you already came in tired and drained and irritated and hungry and all these things, well, that is certainly going to impact your dialogue with somebody. How are you feeling during the conversation? You might start to notice a shift in yourself for the better or the worse. And I don't like to make things good or bad, but you may feel a higher or lower energy in the body. And finally, how are you walking away from that interaction? So I know at the end of the day, for example, dancing. Dancing is an activity that totally moves me. I know that I completely get into flow states. I know the interactions I have with the people on the dance floor are beautiful. And so every time I come home from that, I'm like so energized. And that energy transfers onto a partner, transfers onto whoever's in the space that I'm sharing it with, whatnot. So I'm aware of that. I'm getting energy from the environment, and then I'm also transferring that energy to other environments. There are certain people in conversations, and I'm sure you could agree with me on this. Have you ever spoken to someone before, Mike, that you're like, oh man, I'm so exhausted afterwards?
Oh, of course, all the time.
Yeah, that I would say, okay, tune into that. Now, whether that's like maybe a one-off thing, maybe that's not fair to completely judge someone based on a one-time experience, because you may have walked in and your energy may have been off, and you may have also been tired, and there could be different dynamics going on. But if you consistently notice that every time you're with someone, you're feeling drained, there's something to be said about that interaction. And so I think when we're mindful of our energy levels, when we check in with our body and say, is this interaction like really fueling me and bringing out the best in me, or is it draining me? That's also a very clear indicator as to whether you actually want to continue spending time with that person or people or not.
I wrote a blog. This is one of my earliest blogs. I believe it's probably in 2018. I wrote this blog, maybe 2018. I forget when I wrote it. It's talking about the concept of different types of people, where the different types of people are going to be in the blog are toxic, anchors, and embers. So toxic people are going to be people who drain you, right? So kind of like they take away from you. So at the end of the conversation or the end of the meet, you're like, oh man, this is exhausting. I got to go drink something like a wine or a cocktail or like a suburban, whatever you got available, you need it ASAP. But then you have anchors, and those are those quiet killers. Those anchors are going to be like your family members. They could be a spouse, a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend. It doesn't necessarily matter, but they can be people who keep you still, where they stop you from being more in your days and your life. It's so subtle that you might not even know that they're doing it. I talk about it in detail in the blog so you can easily understand who's an anchor in your life. And no one wants to be called an anchor. But in reality, most people who have family members that they associate with, a good majority of those people are anchors. I'm going to just say one little piece on that and then go into embers. There was a rapper who did a little test before he made it. I just saw the video the other day. He sent a text message to 10 of his family members. And he says, hey, I'm trying to, get my career going. And I'm trying to, get some money for my CD or my, like to create some funds for his studio time, right? So he was looking for some funds from these family members. So he texts 10 people. Only 2 out of the 10 people responded to him saying, okay, I'll give you the money. So they gave him the $100. So he got $200. He probably didn't need the money, but it was a test. Who in my family is going to be there to light me up, to help me along my way? And then who's going to be there to take from my pockets when I have a lot of money in my pockets? Because now he has a lot of money. And those same people who didn't give him $100 are asking him for $100. So those people are going to be toxic and anchors, because at first they weren't helping you. They were keeping you where you were because they don't want to see you do good. They don't want to see you successful. But then you have those 2 people who invested that $100. I'm going to lift you up. I'm going to believe in you. And the thing about belief is that you only need one person to believe in you in the world, but it's a lot easier when you have more than one. If you have 2, if you have 3, if you have 5, you have 10, it doesn't necessarily matter. If you can believe in yourself and you have that type of mindset where I'm going to do this regardless of, I don't care if the world's against me, I'm going to do it, you're still going to do it. But if you have someone who's there and believing in you along the way, and that's why it's so important for communication, especially with your partner, to have someone who's going to believe in you. Because if they don't believe in you, then that's just an anchor in your life, because they're going to be stopping you from being more. Just that awareness of understanding who's in your life, it says so much.
May I add to that for a moment?
Of course, that's what we're here for.
I was like, I don't want to cut you off mid-thought. So I think that was a really interesting example and a really interesting test that he did. And here's the thing. I think finances can be one of the stickiest things to test somebody about. And I say this because we don't know people's shit. Pardon my French. It may have absolutely nothing to do with supporting someone, as it may have something to do with either one, somebody else's financial situation being extremely scarce, or their mindset around finances being extremely scarce. And so I almost wonder if a better test would have been to say, can you show up at the studio when I'm recording this? I really want your support, your physical support there. But you're really seeing who's coming around and who's helping. And I feel like that is huge because that actually requires someone to take the time aside, be very intentional, put it in their calendar and show up for you on that day and really come to support. And I don't think it costs anything to be able to do that, financially at least. And so I almost wonder if that would be a really fascinating test as opposed to it just strictly being about money. It's not to take away from what he did because that's still a very interesting test. I would almost just want zero factors in the way of letting someone be able to support me and show that they can really genuinely support me, even if they have nothing financially to be able to do so. I saw this show up I ran a retreat 2 months ago. I did a mock trial run before I ran the big one. And I had 12 friends of mine. Well, I should rephrase that and say I put about 24 people in the group. Out of those 24 people, 12 showed up. Those 12 people will forever stick in my mind because not only did they come to give me feedback and everything else, they also did testimonials and everything else to help support my growth. That for me spoke volumes. I'm like, you giving 3 days to helping show up for my mock retreat just to tell me where I can improve is huge. So I definitely agree with what you're saying and the sentiment behind it all. I just think there's various ways we can test people, but I don't disagree with testing people.
Again, it's the awareness. It's how
Yeah.
you're viewing it.
For
A
sure.
bit of context. He was a rapper, a black rapper, and he's a male. Men are going to be looking at it a little bit differently. I've had female friends who would have plays or recitals and things like that, and they would invite 50 people and no one shows up, right? So like that's heartbreaking right there,
Yeah.
right? Where it's like not even one of these people I invited showed up, right? It didn't cost them anything, but we look at things differently, especially in our situation. I'm a believer in you can amass, some money. It didn't have to be the $100. Hey, I know you're looking for 100, but like money's tight right now. I mean, I can give you 10. That didn't happen, but that's not to belittle, these people and their situations if they did have one. Oftentimes is that many people, again, they're that anchor aspect. And I want to make it clear, they're that anchor aspect. It's difficult for a person to see someone rise and they stay the same because that right there, it shows just how much they're not doing in their days. They have so much potential that they leave untapped and they see it so clearly when they see someone starting to do this and rise up. It's an eye-opening experience.
For sure. And I love that you said this too. I would also say this intertwines consciousness with curiosity. And how? And what do I mean by this? When we're actually aware, if we actually take a moment just to stop and think, why did I not give that money, for example? Why was I not supportive? Why didn't I come to the recital? Why didn't I do these things? If we actually stop for a moment and thought, what's really going on here? So maybe I have untapped potential and maybe I'm jealous that you're reaching your potential faster than me or that you're even taking steps and I'm not. To even get aware of that is huge. But then the next piece would be instead of sitting in all of that, jealousy or that dark type of emotional energy, the best thing would be to do is ask the person, what are you doing to get to where you want to go? And what can I do, even if I'm just one step behind you, what can I do to take that action to work towards something great as well? Because actually, that's really what I want. I don't want to be jealous of you. I want to be excited for you. And I also want to learn how to do this myself. So can you teach me? I think that goes such a long way in flipping that framing on it rather than looking at someone from a distance and saying, oh, I'm going to judge that because they're doing well. Instead saying, let me ask actually what they're doing so I can do it too.
Yeah. But the idea of just communication where someone could have said, hey, I don't have it, or like giving them a reason, maybe not an excuse, like this is really what's happening versus, maybe not even texting back or like hearing from them. So it's kind of like they went ghost. Did you hear from your 12 friends that never showed up or did they make excuses?
Both.
So regardless of both of them, it's going to have the same thing. It's kind of like a bad taste in my mouth. So we talked about curiosity. We talked about consciousness. So let's get into step 3.
Yeah. So, and I have said it over and over and over and over and over again, and I'll say it again, clarity. We need to be so crystal clear within ourselves, once again, about what's important for us, what's valuable for us, what are our values, what are our boundaries, what do we want and don't want, all of these things, that when we are clear on these things, now we can communicate it with the utmost clarity to someone else. The biggest fights that I have ever seen happen between couples, in the workforce, between kids and their parents, anybody, it always comes down to, oh, you were thinking this or believing that, or this is where your head was at, or expecting this, and I was way over here in left field. And so there's no cohesion between what's going on in one person's mind and another, what's the expectation of one person and the other. Right? There's no understanding of what one person wants and the other one doesn't want or does want. And so if you don't have that cohesion and that clarity, like that just leaves room for conflict to take place, because now we may not be on the same page, but we are assuming we are, and we're taking action forward in the relationship until, potential hell breaks loose.
What would be an example of a relationship applying clarity?
Oh, I mean, this is kind of off in left field, but I'll give you a perfect example right now. I went out for dinner last night with a friend of mine. I communicated and said, I'm at the restaurant, I'm around the back. I sat there waiting for 45 minutes, and only to find out 45 minutes later, finally, when I saw him come around back in the restaurant, he was like, oh, I've been sitting at the front the whole time. And I said, where in my communication of I'm at the restaurant and I'm around the back didn't get understood? And if you didn't understand it, at what point did you not think to call or text to gain clarity? And he's like, it didn't really clue into my mind. I just assumed you were late. So this is a sort of off-field, example, but if humans don't actually know how to manage their emotional states, and this is where emotional intelligence comes in, they could just get angry, blow up, extreme fight. I've been waiting here for 45 minutes. I told you where I was. Why didn't you at least call me? I didn't feel I needed to go into that space. I was like, let's chalk this down to a really poor communicative moment. But I'm like, had you had any doubts about my communication, you could have asked instead of assumed. But in general, let's talk sex. Let's talk sex for a second, because that's always a fun one. I think oftentimes men or women will assume, based on previous experiences, based on whatever they have learned in their life, based on what they know, based on what they're comfortable with, they assume that they know what the other person may want in the bedroom. And so consistently taking the same action forward, doing the same things with that partner. And rather than being mindful of how the person is reacting, or, whether they seem to be in pleasure or not, they're just like, oh, check mark, I did my job. I say, are you having dialogues about what you like? Are you having dialogues about what the other person likes? Are you discussing and I'm not necessarily saying in the heart of sex, right in the middle of it, you need to be having these full on deep conversations.
Yes. That's weird.
Right? You can say that for dinner talk. I mean, That's a fun dinner conversation.
Yeah.
But why not ask those questions? That's another one that people are afraid to get into. Oh, sex, that's too taboo. We can't talk about that. And I'm like, why not talk about it? And why not get clear on what you like? And that way you can be on the same page. How many couples I've seen come to me that have gotten married, Mike, and they want to raise their children differently because they're from different religious backgrounds. And I say, did you guys not talk about your difference in religious beliefs while you were dating? And did you not talk about how you'd want to raise your kids? Or people getting married and one wants kids and the other one doesn't. And I'm like, did you guys not have these conversations about children and whether you want them or not? These are they seem almost obvious and basic, but it sometimes baffles me how much what seems to be simple conversations don't actually take place until it shows up when you're married and you say, oh, let's finally talk about the details of our marriage.
Oftentimes, many people assume that this person probably wants kids if they're getting married or if
Yeah.
they are having sex, like, oh, they probably like this or something like that. So it's like assumptions can be one of the leading factors to poor communication. It could be the leading factors for any type of downfall in the relationship or discrepancy that happens, because if I'm going to assume everything is okay, or if I don't even care that things are okay because I'm not going to be inquisitive and ask, then the other person's going to feel left out. They're going to feel maybe betrayed that, the other person is not asking them, hey, like, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? Especially in a relationship, because both people are together to make this relationship work, especially in a marriage, and especially if you have children, because now you have another human that didn't ask to be in this world, but you brought into the world together, that you have to be responsible for. Many people are so quick to run away because, especially in our culture today, it's easy to run away. It's
Yeah.
easy to say, you know what, I'm done,
hmm
versus then let's communicate and let's fix this. Why do you think communication is so hard in that situation?
Oh, one, we're not taught this in school. I mean, point blank. This is something, such an important skill, and yet we don't feel the need to even have full-time classes on this skill. It's involved in everything that we do, and yet we don't talk about talking. So one, I would say it's just a skill that's almost left stagnant, that we haven't practiced. It's a muscle that we haven't built up. We're maneuvering through how to communicate every single day. I would also say that oftentimes, based on our upbringing, people will either, like I said, they'll either fight, freeze, or flight, right? These are the three different sort of general automatic responses to communication. So, it's either like, this thing we're talking about is bringing up so much emotion in me that maybe I'm not even aware of. Let me fight back about it. Or they freeze, they're paralyzed. Like, I'm not sure how to maneuver this. I'm kind of afraid. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to lose them. I don't want it to create this big fight. So then they just freeze and don't discuss in the moment. And then even more extreme is the avoidant, where it's like, let's just continue sweeping that under the rug and let's not talk about it. And oftentimes I think people don't want to talk about these things because they're afraid of losing the person. They're afraid of causing conflict. They're afraid of things not working out in favor for them. And I would say, sure, in the short term, that may work for you, but in the long term, you're actually creating more of a wedge between you, and you're slowly moving towards greater and greater disconnection, rather than actually having what could present as the difficult conversations. But every difficult conversation actually leads us closer and closer to connecting with each other, assuming we also have the ability to emotionally manage ourselves.
And the conversation of communication is a deep one, especially since we don't learn it from a young age. We are learning from our environment mostly. So we see people communicate when we're younger. So then that's how we primarily learn our language. And of course, there's going to be people who immerse themselves in different languages and they learn other languages. But the majority of people they're going to know just their native language. They're also going to develop the habits of the people that they see. Is mom and dad talking? Are grandma and grandpa talking? Are my friends talking to each other about certain things, right? Or what are they talking about? Because typically, especially in teenagers, we talk about gossip. We talk about what's popular on TV. So we say, oh, well, we have to associate with these types of things also. It's not so much, hey, how are you doing today? How are you feeling? Like, is everything going good with your family? You seem a little down. You want to talk about it? We don't do that. It's not until someone is at that breaking point where that trauma has finally amassed enough inside them where they're like, I have to let go. Otherwise, I'm going to destroy myself. So that's when they get help. That's when they seek a coach like yourself or myself that is going to be that outlet or to hold the space for that individual so they can let go everything, open up the dam and let the floodgates free of all those emotions that we have bottled up on the inside, where those emotions only fester and they cause us to become negative and to retract our actions toward more positive things and toward better type of behavior, similar to how we were talking about early on, how men don't work out. It's because oftentimes men are going to be bottling up a lot of their emotions. Men don't typically talk about their emotions. So they would rather be insecure and then hold everything inside and then wonder why they're at home on a Monday evening drinking a 6-pack of beer, right? So after their 9 to 5, they need an outlet.
Yeah, watching porn. I see that happen a lot with young men too.
And it's that systematic way of coping with stress that is causing a lot of issues for these young men. But again, communication is just one of those initial steps into the process of relationships and growth. And I know we only got to 3 of our 9 keys or 3 of the connection code step. And so I'm going to have you on so we could talk about the other 6. So it could be either 2 more episodes or 1 more episode. I'm not sure how it's going to go with the flow. If I can from you, Giovanna, if you wanted to talk about anything that I just said right there to kind of give your 2 cents.
Yeah. I always feel like as you speak, Mike, I'm like, oh, that one and that one. I was like, can I take notes? So one of the biggest things that came up for me in what you said more than anything, I think is 2 pieces. One, it's really speaking to men and whether they have safe spaces to emotionally express themselves. And 2, this area of addiction. And so I think more often than not, and I don't want to arguably say that the stats point more in the direction of men, but I do believe they do, that you will often see more men getting engaged in acts of violence, pornography, drugs, alcohol. Maybe you'll see women leaning more towards food. And this is generally where, addictions show up. But you see men often falling or succumbing to one of these addictions. And I think it's because they don't often feel they have those safe spaces to be able to open up. They don't have those areas to not only express themselves, but to also not feel judged while expressing themselves. And I think that's why people come to coaches like us, because they feel like it's a safe space and they feel like there's no judgment on the table to be able to open up and actually dialogue and be real about what's really going on for them. But if men don't know that that's an option, I see one of 2 things often happen. Either one, men become serial daters or serial relationship doers, let's say, in that they jump from one long-term relationship to another because they feel safe and comfortable talking to that one girlfriend about what's going on for the most part, and they'll open up to her. But the moment that relationship ends, I find men are actually often the ones struggling the most, and they're very quick to often jump into other relationships because it's almost like there's that gap of that emotional safe space to be able to open up to someone, unless men have built strong, healthy masculine relationships, whatever we want to call it, safe spaces with their other male counterparts, other male friends. If men have not built those out for themselves, then they will often turn to women in their relationships, or they will turn to addiction. And the ones that I think really do well for themselves end up turning to coaches and end up building those safe spaces in their male group friends, right? And those are the ones that have alternative outlets to be able to express themselves. And unfortunately, a lot of men don't necessarily know that those are options until they hit their 30s, 40s. Sometimes men never discover these things. And I'm saying men more than anything because I think we come from a culture that is much more forgiving to women and much more that creates more space for women to open up emotionally as opposed to men. And I think this is why I really love working with men, because I think they need it more than ever. And if they can feel comfortable in that feminine energy, then why not be that space for them to work through their stuff?
For any man listening to this, my advice is to speak with a coach. It doesn't have to be a man coach. It could be a woman coach, but don't use your partner or your relationship as an outlet. That's one of the worst things that you can do, because especially in conflict, she might use that against you, and it can cause a betrayal in your ego. And it's hard to repair that for men. Maybe from a woman's standpoint, they won't see that, but a man should not relinquish their emotional state to their partner. Not saying that they can't talk to them about their emotion, but you have to understand how frequently do you do it. Like if you're doing it every single day when you get home from work, that's bitching and moaning. Stop that. Get a coach, have that coach be, hold that space for you. You want to get into the habit of communicating your emotions, getting them out of you, or, out from your mind or out from your body, and then getting a little bit of guidance or some directive of better habits that you can create, maybe versus then doing some destructive things like smoking or drinking or being a serial dater or
Yeah.
whatever you do. There are better options.
Mhm.
So, Giovanna, what I want is for you to give us any last words for the podcast and for the viewers.
I'm amazed. Like time just seems to fly. Any last words? The first thing that really comes up for me more than anything is I think it's really important for us to tune into ourselves first and foremost. to trust the messaging that comes through us intuitively. Our body is always speaking to us. I think our gut is always speaking to us. And I think if we were to just take moments aside throughout our day to listen in, we would actually have a lot of the answers as to how to maneuver our way through our relationships and through our communication. And if nothing else, at least we would bring ourselves back to somewhat of a state of peace and groundedness. That way we can actually approach these relationships with that same energy. The very last thing I want to say is, and I believe these were the words of Albert Einstein, he said, you cannot fix a problem from the same state of consciousness that caused the problem. In other words, if you are in the heat of a problem, don't try and fix it from that high emotional peak, whether it be extreme anger or complete avoidance. Change your emotional state, remove yourself from the situation, or dialogue in a different way. Do whatever you need to do. Take a big breath, but shift the emotional state. That way you can look at the issue, the conflict, whatever it is, from a totally different angle. And that way you'll actually find more solutions to what's taking place as well. You'll come to realize half the conflicts that we have with the people in our lives don't need to be as big as we make them out to be if we just have some of these small tools to really help ourselves. Yeah, so you guys can reach out to me on Facebook, Giovanna Elias, and also feel free to book a connection call with me. And don't be shy. We can even just have a nice little connection call and chat about life for a little bit.
And the key is communication, because what we're trying to do is to create that communication between people. Once again, it might be a lost art, but it doesn't have to be forgotten forever. I will definitely put your links in the description box below, as always, so people can easily find you, follow your socials, and then easily be able to contact you. And I do want to thank you for spending some time with me today. We will have to do a part 2, maybe even a part 3 to get through our 9-key system, because I think that's going to be important. But for anyone who's impatient, who needs to know what those other keys are, check out her website. The link is in the description box below. And then you can learn how to be an effective communicator sooner rather than waiting for part 2.
Beautiful. I look forward to connecting with you all. Mike, thank you so much for having me here today.
Of course. All right, everyone. I would like to thank you for watching the episode with Giovanna and myself. We were talking about communication, about relationships, and I mean, this is going to be some juicy stuff where I think many people are going to listen to this and they're going to see the improvements that they can make in their life. Whether you feel like you need to get a coach today that can help you with your communications or help facilitate your emotional baggage, we are trying to figure out what you need in order to grow as a person. In reality, we all need some support. We might think that we can do things by ourselves, and we might believe that we don't need anyone else on our journey. But when you have that company, when you have that helping hand, it becomes a little bit easier. And I remember one time when I had went on a 2-week camping trip with my dog. It was the last day of school, and I had left school and my car was already packed. And the only thing I had to do was put the cooler in the car. And I went off on a New England road trip. This is when I was living in Connecticut still. So the first stop was Massachusetts, and then we went up to Vermont, and then New Hampshire, and then Maine, and Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. We went all over. And what I can tell you was the first night when I was in Massachusetts, I had to go out and procure firewood. And my dog was like only, I believe, 9 months old, but I had trained her. So I trained her every day for 45 minutes since she was 8 weeks old. So she was already a part of the deal where she knew how to do things and how to operate, basically perfect obedience. What had happened was, now I'm going out and getting this wood, and I'm having to cook, I'm having to put up these tents, and I'm having to watch this dog too because she's curious, because she's 9 months old. But of course I can call her and she comes back, but I always have to call her. So it was one of those hurdles that I learned, that it was a lot of work to do everything by myself. The point I'm trying to drive here is that when you have someone helping you procure the firewood or do the cooking or do the cleaning or do the watching of the kids or the dogs or the pets or whatever you have, it becomes easier. And when you're able to communicate that, it becomes even easier, because I think sometimes we make assumptions in the ideas of, well, this person is supposed to do this. This is their role. Well, of course, there might be some gender roles that are generalized, but we do have to have a good understanding of, this is what we kind of had that conversation about. We communicated this versus then, well, I expect you to do this, or I expected you to do this, or I assumed that you do this. And I think if we are not curious, if we're not going to be conscious, and we're not going to be clear, we're not going to be effective communicators. And when we dived into those 3 steps today, we were creating the concept of creating a safe space for someone to understand the other person or to learn how to communicate better with that other person. Because the last thing you want to do is to open up to someone, especially the wrong person. Because if you have a dream, if you have a goal, if you have something that you want to do in your life, like an ambition, and you tell it to the wrong person, that person is going to show you every single way or tell you every single way that what you have in mind is going to fail or not going to become reality. So we have to be cautious in the sense of who we tell our dreams to, who we communicate to, because not everyone's going to have our best at heart. And it's difficult to find those people. But I can tell you just from the conversation I had with Giovanna on this episode that she's going to be a good facilitator, whether you're a male or female, she's going to be helping you out. Now, if you are looking for a men's coach, of course, I have many on the podcast already. If you're looking for a men's coach to facilitate your emotions or to speak about your emotions with, then of course you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to any one of the other men's coaches that I had and begin that process, because it's easy for us to get entwined in our emotions and to become emotionally detached. But when you're in a relationship, especially in a marriage, it's important to keep that communication up. Early on in the episode, we talked about that 90-minute aspect of communication. Are you speaking with your partner for at least 90 minutes a week? And if not, how can you start to implement that? You don't want to wait until everything is broken until you try to fix things, because that's one of the worst things that you can do. And the same thing is true in your life and your mindset. If you have a very negative mindset, a very pessimistic or toxic type of mindset, don't wait until something tragic happens in your life. Begin that change now. Learn how to ask yourself the questions that are going to help you grow rather than keep you stagnant. And the idea of communication is going to be learning about skills that we're not necessarily taught, but we see in our environment, and that we're influenced from our parents, from our peer groups. And those relationships might not be conducive to happiness in the sense of, are we creating harmony in the people that we have around us? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but oftentimes there's going to be some type of conflict that needs to be remediated. So if you're in the mindset of tuning up or sprucing up your communication skills, then this episode is going to definitely be the one. And I'll definitely have Giovanna on again for part 2 to try to get through those 9 key systems so we can learn how to be the best effective communicator that we can be. If we can't get it done in part 2, we're going to get it done in part 3 for sure. So I want you to stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, practice these 3 steps that we talked about in the podcast so you can learn or begin the process to becoming the best communicator possible. My name is Michael Rearden. I'm a mindset coach. If you have any questions, you can email me coachinginsession@gmail.com. And I will see everyone on the next episode of Coaching in Session. Until then, everyone, take care.